I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. My blood turned to ice when I saw the man who had destroyed my life 7 years ago standing at my daughter's engagement party, charming everyone with that same devastating smile that had fooled me when I was a grieving widow. I dropped my champagne glass and it shattered across the marble floor with a sound like my breaking heart. Every guest turned to stare, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the ghost from my past. I'm Jennifer King, but everyone calls me Jenny, and at 65, I thought I'd learned to spot predators who prey on vulnerable women. I was wrong. Standing there in my daughter Rachel's pristine living room, surrounded by the elite of Chicago society, I realized the nightmare I'd escaped 7 years ago had just walked back into my life, wearing an expensive suit and calling himself Jonathan Harris. Rachel rushed over, her wedding dress fitting appointment forgotten in her concern. "Mom, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ghost was exactly right. James Reynolds, the man who'd nearly destroyed me in 2018, was now my daughter's fiancé. The same piercing blue eyes, the same charming smile, the same calculated way of working a room. At 50, he still had that dangerous appeal that made women forget to be careful. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I lied, my voice barely steady. "Just clumsy." But I wasn't fine. My mind was racing back to Chicago 2018 when I was 58 and barely 6 months into widowhood. Robert had died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving me lost and drowning in grief. I'd met James Reynolds at a coffee shop near the Grief Counseling Center. He was 42, charming, attentive, with just enough vulnerability to make me feel needed again. For 10 months, he made me feel beautiful, desired, alive again after the numbness of loss, right up until I discovered he'd been slowly draining the life insurance money Robert had left me. "Mom, let me introduce you properly," Rachel said, her face glowing with happiness. "Jonathan, this is my mother, Jennifer King." Jonathan stepped forward and I watched his face carefully. For just a split second, I saw recognition flicker in those blue eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the perfect mask of a man meeting his future mother-in-law for the first time. "Mrs. King," he said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "I've heard so much about you. Rachel talks about you constantly." I forced myself to shake his hand even as my skin crawled at the contact. "How lovely. And what business are you in, Mr. Harris?" "Investment consulting," he replied smoothly. "I help people make smart decisions with their money." The irony was so thick I nearly choked on it. Of course, he was still in the business of separating people from their money. Some things never changed. "How did you two meet?" I asked, my voice artificially bright. Rachel beamed. "At the gym. Jonathan was so persistent, asking me out for 3 weeks before I finally said yes." Persistent. That was one word for it. I remembered how persistent he'd been with me, too, showing up at the Grief Counseling Center, offering comfort, understanding, patience. As the evening wore on, I watched him work the room with practiced ease. He remembered everyone's names, asked about their children, their businesses, their interests. It was masterful, really. If I didn't know what he was capable of, I might have been impressed. But I did know, and watching him charm my daughter's friends and colleagues made me sick to my stomach. When the party finally ended and Rachel walked me to my car, she was practically vibrating with happiness. "Isn't he wonderful, Mom? I can't believe how lucky I am." "When's the wedding?" I managed to ask. "October 15th. I know it's short notice, but we don't want to wait. When you know, right?" October 15th. Less than a month away. My heart sank as I realized how little time I had to figure out what Jonathan was really after. But I had a terrible feeling I already knew. 3 sleepless nights later, I sat in my kitchen at 2 a.m. with my laptop open, diving deep into the internet rabbit hole of Jonathan Harris's life. What I found chilled me to the bone, because officially Jonathan Harris didn't exist until January 2020. Before that date, there were no social media profiles, no business records, no digital footprint whatsoever. For a successful investment consultant, that was impossible in today's world. Either he'd scrubbed his entire online presence, or Jonathan Harris was a carefully constructed identity. I had to know more. On Friday morning, I made a call that I hoped would lead me to answers. "Patricia Wilson Investigations," a crisp voice answered. "I need to meet with you today," I said without preamble. "It's about my daughter's fiancé." Patricia came highly recommended and specialized in background checks for worried families. When we met at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town 2 hours later, I could see why she was considered the best. In her mid-50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail, she exuded competence and discretion. "Tell me everything," she said after we'd ordered coffee. I explained the situation, starting with my encounter with James Reynolds 7 years ago and ending with the engagement party. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes. "So your primary concern is verifying whether Jonathan Harris is actually James Reynolds," she summarized. "Yes, and if he is, I need to know what he's been doing for the past 7 years and why he suddenly appeared in my daughter's life." Patricia nodded. "We'll start with facial recognition software comparing old photos of Reynolds to current ones of Harris. I'll also need access to any documentation you have from your time with Reynolds, emails, photos, anything." "There's something else," I said, my voice dropping. "Rachel's trust fund from her father. It matures when she turns 35 in 18 months. $2.5 million that would make my lost $75,000 look like pocket change." Patricia's expression hardened. "That sounds like motive to me." By Saturday morning, my phone rang with Patricia's number. "Mrs. King, I need to meet with you today. This can't wait." We met at the same diner. Patricia spread photos and documents across our corner booth. "Jonathan Harris is clean as a whistle," she said. "Too clean. No criminal record, excellent credit, successful business. But here's the problem. Every piece of documentation starts in 2020. It's like he was born 5 years ago." She showed me business licenses, tax records, even apartment rental agreements. All began in January 2020. "I did some digging into similar cases," Patricia continued. "This pattern suggests identity theft or witness protection, but witness protection was ruled out through my law enforcement contacts." "What about before 2020?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew the answer. "That's where it gets interesting. I found traces of a James Reynolds from Chicago who disappeared in 2018 after being investigated for romance fraud. The case went cold when he vanished." My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as my hands shook. "What kind of fraud?" "Targeting widows and divorcees mostly. He'd provide comfort during vulnerable times, gain their trust, then slowly drain their accounts, usually between $50,000 and $100,000 per victim." I closed my eyes, remembering the $75,000 that had disappeared from my life insurance settlement. The money Robert had left to secure my future. The money James had convinced me to invest in his business opportunity. "There's something else," Patricia said, her voice softer now. "I've been tracking similar cases across the country. Phoenix in 2020, Nashville in 2022, Denver in 2023. Always the same pattern. Professional women between 28 and 35. Quick engagements. Sudden disappearances right before the wedding." "With their money," I whispered. "With whatever he could get his hands on. The Nashville woman lost her entire inheritance. The Denver victim had her business accounts cleaned out the day before their wedding." I stared at Rachel's engagement photo, which I'd brought to show Patricia, my beautiful, trusting daughter who'd inherited her father's generous heart and would inherit substantial money on her next birthday. "What do I do?" I asked. "If I tell Rachel, she'll think I'm a bitter mother who can't accept her happiness." Patricia nodded grimly. "That's exactly what he's counting on. These men are experts at isolating their victims from family members who might see through their act." I thought about the past few months, how Rachel had gradually pulled away from me. Canceled dinners, rushed phone calls, always with some excuse about being busy with Jonathan's social obligations. He was already turning her against me. It was textbook behavior. But here's the thing, Mrs. King. You're the first person I've met who actually knew him before. You're the key to stopping him. As I drove home, my mind was spinning with possibilities. I had to find a way to expose Jonathan without looking like the jealous ex. I had to protect Rachel without losing her completely. The problem was, I was dealing with a master manipulator who'd had 7 years to perfect his next move. And he had something I didn't: Rachel's complete trust and love. But I had something he didn't know I possessed: the memory of exactly how he'd betrayed me before. And this time I wasn't a grieving widow with clouded judgment. This time I was ready for war. Sunday dinner at Rachel's had always been our tradition, but sitting across from Jonathan Harris at her dining room table felt like being trapped in a nightmare. He'd insisted on cooking some elaborate Italian dish that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. "This is delicious, honey," Rachel gushed, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "Mom, you have to get the recipe." "Oh, I doubt I could recreate Jonathan's magic," I replied with my sweetest smile. "I'm sure it requires very expensive ingredients." Jonathan's laugh was perfectly pitched. "Actually, it's quite simple. The secret is taking time to build trust with your ingredients. Let them blend naturally." The double meaning wasn't lost on me. I'd bet he was excellent at building trust with vulnerable ingredients. "So, Jonathan," I said, cutting into my chicken, "Rachel mentioned you're from the East Coast originally. Where exactly?" "Boston," he replied without hesitation. "Moved around a lot for work, though. Los Angeles, Phoenix, Nashville." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. He'd just confirmed Patricia's research without realizing it. Same cities, same timeline. "How interesting. What brought you to Chicago?" His eyes met mine across the table. "Sometimes life brings you exactly where you need to be, when you need to be there." Rachel looked between us, sensing something in the air, but not understanding what. "Jonathan says Chicago feels like home now. Don't you, sweetheart?" "Especially since I met you," he said, bringing her hand to his lips. "And now, meeting your wonderful mother." I wanted to throw my wine glass at his lying face. Instead, I smiled and asked, "What about family? Will any of your relatives be coming to the wedding?" "Unfortunately, no. I'm pretty much on my own in the world. Parents died when I was young. No siblings." His voice carried just the right note of practiced sadness. It was a different story than he told me 7 years ago when his parents were supposedly alive but estranged. Some lies evolved with practice. After dinner, Rachel excused herself to take a work call, leaving me alone with Jonathan for the first time. The mask slipped just slightly. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair with a wine glass, "Rachel's told me so much about her childhood. Growing up with just you after her father died must have been challenging." "We managed just fine," I replied carefully. "I'm sure you did." She mentioned her trust fund, how it matures next year when she turns 35. There it was, the real reason he was here. Rachel's trust fund worth over $2 million, accessible in just 18. "Rachel's very fortunate," I said neutrally. "She is indeed, and so trusting. Sometimes I worry about that. The world is full of people who might take advantage of someone with such a generous heart." The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. He was actually warning me about people like himself while planning to rob my daughter blind. "Yes," I agreed. "I worry about that too." Our eyes met across the table, and for a moment, the pretense fell away completely. He was testing me, seeing if I remembered him, and I was letting him know that I did. "I'd hate for anyone to come between Rachel and her happiness," he said quietly. "She's been through enough disappointment in relationships." The threat was subtle, but clear. If I tried to expose him, he'd paint me as the bitter mother who couldn't accept her daughter's happiness. Rachel's voice drifted from the living room as she wrapped up her call. Jonathan's charming smile returned instantly. I'm so glad we had this chance to talk, Jennifer. I have a feeling we're going to get along wonderfully. When Rachel returned, she found us looking like the picture of familial harmony. Are you two bonding? She asked hopefully. Absolutely, Jonathan said warmly. I was just telling your mother how much I'm looking forward to officially becoming part of the family. As I drove home that night, my hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. Jonathan Harris wasn't just back in my life. He was about to destroy the person I loved most in the world. And this time he wasn't going to disappear with $75,000. This time he was going for everything. Monday morning brought the phone call I'd been dreading. Rachel's voice was strained, different somehow. Mom, we need to talk. She arrived at my house an hour later, but instead of coming inside for coffee like she usually did, she stayed standing in my doorway with her arms crossed. Jonathan told me about your conversation yesterday, she said without preamble. My heart sank. What conversation would that be? Don't play dumb, Mom. The way you interrogated him at dinner, asking all those invasive questions about his family, his past. He said you seemed almost suspicious of him. I kept my voice level. I was just getting to know him better. Isn't that what mothers do? Not like that. You were practically giving him the 3rd degree. Rachel's eyes flashed with anger I'd rarely seen directed at me. And then making comments about expensive ingredients and where he's from. What is wrong with you? This was exactly what Jonathan had been setting up, driving a wedge between us so that anything I said would sound like jealousy or interference. Rachel, honey, I'm just concerned because everything is moving so fast. Here we go, she interrupted. I knew you'd say that. That's not true. And you know it. Do I? Because ever since I started dating Jonathan, you've been acting strange. First questioning his job, then his background, now his intentions. I stared at my daughter, this beautiful, successful attorney I'd raised on my own after Robert died, and realized Jonathan had been working on her for months, planting seeds of doubt about my motives, making her question my love for her. Rachel, I love you more than anything in this world. Every decision I've ever made has been about protecting you and supporting you. Then why can't you just be happy for me? Her voice broke a little. I finally found someone who loves me completely, who wants to build a life with me, and instead of celebrating, you're trying to sabotage it. I'm not trying to sabotage anything. I just think you should slow down. That's exactly what Jonathan said you'd say. She shook her head. He warned me you might have trouble letting go, that some mothers struggle when their daughters find real love. The manipulation was brilliant, really. Jonathan had positioned himself as the understanding boyfriend who could predict my jealous mother behavior, making Rachel feel protective of him and suspicious of me. What else did Jonathan say? I asked quietly. Rachel hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. He said maybe we should take some space from family drama until after the wedding. Let things calm down. Space? I think it would be better if you didn't come to the wedding, Mom. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter, uninviting me to her wedding because a con man had convinced her I was the problem. Rachel, please, let's talk about this rationally. There's nothing to talk about. I've made up my mind. She turned to leave, then looked back with tears in her eyes. I hoped you'd be different, Mom. I hoped you'd want me to be happy. After she left, I sat in my kitchen and cried harder than I had since Robert died. Jonathan had played this perfectly. He'd isolated Rachel from the one person who could expose him, and he'd done it by making her believe she was protecting their love from my interference. But as the tears dried, something else took their place. Anger. Pure white-hot rage at the man who'd stolen from me once and was now stealing my daughter. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Wilson. He made his first mistake, I told her. He's trying to keep me away from the wedding. That tells me he's planning something big, something that requires me not to be there. What do you want to do? I stared out my window at the maple tree Robert had planted when Rachel was born. 32 years of watching over this family. And I wasn't about to stop now. I want to know everything about Jonathan Harris, or James Reynolds, or whatever his real name is, I said. Every woman he's ever scammed, every lie he's ever told. And then I want to save my daughter, whether she wants to be saved or not. Patricia's investigation over the next week revealed a pattern so disturbing I could barely sleep. Jonathan Harris wasn't just a con man. He was a predator who specifically targeted women at their most vulnerable moments. "Look at this," Patricia said, spreading photographs across my dining room table. Denver, 2023. Rebecca Morrison, 34, recently divorced, inherited her grandmother's antique jewelry business. Jonathan showed up 6 months after her divorce was finalized. The photo showed a lovely blonde woman with kind eyes, standing next to a man I now recognized as my daughter's fiancé. He looked exactly the same as he did now, like he'd found some fountain of youth. Nashville, 2022. Jennifer Walsh, 38, lost her husband in a motorcycle accident, collected a substantial life insurance payout. Another photo, another beautiful woman, same predatory smile on Jonathan's face. Phoenix, 2020. Catherine Chen, 36, tech executive who just sold her startup. The pattern was unmistakable. Successful women between 30 and 40, recent life changes, substantial assets, just like Rachel, who'd recently made partner at her law firm, and whose trust fund was approaching maturity. "What happened to them?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Rebecca lost $180,000. Her business collapsed within 6 months of him disappearing. She's working as a waitress now. Jennifer? Lost her house. Had to move back in with her parents. Catherine? Patricia paused. Catherine had a nervous breakdown. She's still in therapy. I closed my eyes, imagining Rachel's face when she discovered the man she loved had destroyed her life. The betrayal would break something fundamental in her, just like it had been broken in me 7 years ago. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "I found records of him using different names. Before Jonathan Harris, he was James Sterling, then Jason Stone, then James Reynolds. Different initials each time. Makes him harder to track," I observed. Exactly. But here's the interesting part. In every case, he disappeared exactly 1 week before the wedding. 1 week, like clockwork. Gets them to consolidate their accounts for wedding expenses, transfers everything to a joint account for their new life together, then vanishes the night before the final transfer. I stared at the calendar on my phone. October 15th was 12 days away. "We don't have much time," I said. "Actually, we do. If he sticks to pattern, he won't make his move until October 8th. That gives us 5 more days to gather evidence." "But evidence of what? Even if we prove Jonathan Harris was really James Reynolds, Rachel is so thoroughly convinced I'm the villain that she'd probably think I'd fabricated everything out of spite." I need to approach this differently, I realized. I need to make him expose himself. Patricia looked concerned. "Mrs. King, this man is dangerous. Not physically, maybe, but psychologically. He's had 7 years to plan this revenge." "So have I," I said grimly. "He thinks he's dealing with the grieving widow he manipulated in 2018. He has no idea what losing that $75,000 taught me about predators." That afternoon, I drove to Rachel's office building and waited in the parking garage. I knew she usually worked late on Tuesdays, and I was betting Jonathan didn't know her schedule as well as he pretended to. At 7:00 p.m., Rachel emerged from the elevator, looking tired but happy. She was on her phone, probably with Jonathan, laughing at something he was saying. When she saw me standing by her car, her expression hardened. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to apologize," I said simply. "You were right. I was being overprotective and unfair to Jonathan." Rachel's anger wavered, replaced by cautious hope. "You were?" "I was scared of losing you," I continued, letting genuine emotion into my voice. But watching you these past few months, seeing how happy he makes you, I realized I was being selfish. I took a deep breath. I called Jonathan this afternoon. I lied smoothly. I invited him to lunch tomorrow so I could apologize properly. Clear the air between us. Rachel's face lit up. You did? I want to give him a chance to know the real me, not the suspicious mother. And I want him to know he has my blessing. As I drove home, I knew I was taking a massive risk. If my plan backfired, I'd lose Rachel forever. But if I did nothing, Jonathan would destroy her life and disappear, leaving me to pick up the pieces of my broken daughter. Either way, tomorrow's lunch with Jonathan Harris was going to be very interesting. I chose the restaurant carefully. Upscale enough that Jonathan would feel comfortable, quiet enough that our conversation wouldn't be overheard, but public enough that he couldn't lose his temper completely. When he arrived 5 minutes late, I was already seated at a corner table with my back to the wall. "Jennifer," he said with that practiced charm, kissing my cheek like we were old friends. "Thank you for reaching out. Rachel was so happy when I told her about your call." "I owe you an apology," I began, playing the contrite mother perfectly. "I realize I came across as hostile Sunday night. It wasn't fair to you." Jonathan settled into his chair, studying me with those calculating blue eyes. "I understand completely. Rachel is lucky to have a mother who cares so much about her welfare. She is my whole world," I said truthfully. "After her father died, she became everything to me. Maybe too much." "Loss can make us protective," he agreed. "But Rachel is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions about love." The waiter came and went, leaving us with wine and small talk about the weather. I waited until Jonathan seemed relaxed before I made my first move. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Of course. Have you ever been in love before?" For just a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked almost like recognition. "Once," he said carefully. "Many years ago, but it didn't work out." "What happened?" I pressed gently. "She was older, going through a difficult time. I thought I could help her heal, but—" He shrugged elegantly. "Sometimes timing is everything." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression sympathetic. He was talking about me, but describing it like a failed romance instead of the financial devastation he'd caused. That must have been painful. It was, but you know what they say, everything happens for a reason. If that relationship hadn't ended, I might not have been ready to appreciate someone as special as Rachel. I sipped my water, watching him carefully. He seemed genuinely relaxed, almost nostalgic. Either he was an incredible actor, or he actually didn't recognize me. "I'm sure she was lovely," I said carefully. "She was beautiful, intelligent, vulnerable. She'd recently lost her husband and was struggling with grief." "How sad. What was her name?" "Jennifer, actually." His eyes met mine with what looked like innocent coincidence. "Jennifer Thompson, though she went by Jenny. Funny how life works, isn't it? Here I am, about to marry the daughter of another Jennifer." The blood drained from my face so quickly I thought I might faint. He knew. He'd known all along who I was, but his expression remained perfectly pleasant, almost fond. Small world, isn't it? I stared at him, my mind racing. When had he figured it out? The engagement party? "You remember her?" I whispered. "Of course I do. I've thought about her often over the years. Wondered what happened to her. Whether she ever found happiness again." He leaned forward slightly. "I hope she did. She deserved better than what I gave her." The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. This wasn't the confrontation I'd expected. Where was the threat, the menace, the calculating predator? "Why?" I breathed. Jonathan's smile was sad, almost wistful. "Because I was young and stupid and thought money mattered more than people. I've regretted it every day since." He signaled the waiter for the check, then looked back at me with what seemed like genuine emotion. "If you ever see her again, Jennifer, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I became the man she deserved. Too late to matter." As he stood to leave, he placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "Thank you for lunch and for giving me a chance. Rachel is lucky to have a mother who loves her so much." As I watched him walk away, I sat in stunned confusion. Either Jonathan Harris was the greatest actor who'd ever lived, or something had fundamentally changed about him in the past 7 years. But as I replayed the conversation in my mind, one thing became crystal clear. He absolutely knew who I was. And for reasons I couldn't understand, he was playing a completely different game than I'd expected. I sat in that restaurant for 20 minutes after Jonathan left, my mind spinning with confusion. His performance had been flawless, full of remorse and apparent growth. But 7 years of healing from his betrayal had taught me to recognize manipulation in all its forms, even when it came wrapped in apologies. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Mom, Jonathan said lunch went beautifully. He's so grateful you're giving him a chance. I'm so happy we can all be family. Love you." The manipulation was evolving. Instead of threats, he was using apparent vulnerability and remorse to lower my guard, make me question my own instincts. I drove straight to Patricia's office. She took one look at my face and knew something had shifted. "He's playing a completely different game," I said, and told her everything about lunch. Patricia frowned. "The reformed bad boy angle, that's sophisticated. But he definitely knew who I was." "Absolutely. The Jennifer Thompson reference, the details about your grief, that wasn't coincidence. He's been planning this approach since he identified you." I paced her office. "So what's his real endgame? If he's genuinely changed, why target Rachel specifically?" "Because he hasn't changed. Jennifer, men like this don't develop consciences. They develop better strategies." Patricia pulled out a new file. "I've been digging deeper into his recent years. Want to know what's interesting? Every one of his victims in the past 5 years has been the daughter or close relative of a previous victim." The blood drained from my face. "What?" "Phoenix 2020. Catherine Chen's victim wasn't random. Her aunt Linda Chen was scammed by Jonathan in Portland 2019. Nashville, Jennifer Walsh. Her sister Emma Walsh was his victim in Atlanta 2021. He's been systematically targeting families," I whispered. "It's not about money anymore, Jennifer. It's about power, about proving he can destroy entire family lines." I sank into a chair, the full scope of his revenge becoming clear. And Rachel is just the latest branch on my family tree. There's more. I found records of him researching your life extensively. He knows about Rachel's law practice, her trust fund, her friends, her habits. This isn't opportunistic. It's surgical. Patricia spread out more documents. He's been in Chicago for 8 months, but he waited 6 months to accidentally meet Rachel at the gym. That's planning, not coincidence. My hands trembled as I flipped through the evidence. Photos of Jonathan with various women, financial records showing substantial withdrawals, newspaper clippings about sudden deaths that made my stomach turn. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need more people on our side," Patricia said firmly. "Rachel's best friend, Emily Morrison. How well do you know her?" "We're close. She and Rachel have been friends since law school. Emily was always like a second daughter to me." "Call her, now." Emily answered on the second ring. "Mrs. King, is everything okay?" "Emily, I need to talk to you about Jonathan. It's important." There was a pause. "Actually, I've been wanting to talk to you about him too. Can we meet?" 30 minutes later, we sat in a quiet corner of a bookstore cafe. Emily looked nervous, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "What's wrong, Emily?" I asked gently. She took a deep breath. "Something's off with Jonathan. I can't put my finger on it, but—" "Rachel's changing. She's canceling plans, isolating herself. And last month, something weird happened." "What?" "2 of Rachel's college friends contacted me. They said some investment guy had reached out to them asking questions about Rachel's financial situation. When I told Rachel, she just laughed it off, said Jonathan must be planning a surprise. My blood ran cold. Did she tell Jonathan about this? Of course, she tells him everything. Emily leaned forward. Mrs. King, I've never seen Rachel like this. It's like she can't think for herself anymore. When I suggested she was moving too fast with Jonathan, she completely shut me out for a week. I reached across the table and squeezed Emily's hand. I need your help, Emily. Jonathan Harris isn't who he claims to be. He's a con man who's targeted Rachel specifically because she's my daughter. For the next hour, I explained everything. My history with James Reynolds, the investigation, the pattern of victims. To her credit, Emily didn't interrupt once. What can I do? She asked when I finished. Rachel won't listen to me right now. She thinks I'm trying to sabotage her happiness, but she might listen to you. Emily shook her head. She's completely under his spell, Mrs. King. If I raise concerns, he'll just isolate her from me too. Then we need to be smarter than him. I have a plan, but I need your help. My plan was simple but risky. We needed to make Jonathan believe he had completely isolated Rachel from everyone who cared about her. Only then would he let his guard down. It starts with me falling into line, I explained to Patricia and Emily back at my house. I need to appear completely defeated, like I've accepted Jonathan and given up any suspicions. Will he believe that? Patricia asked. He'll want to, I replied. Men like Jonathan have enormous egos. He'll believe I've surrendered because that's what he expects. The next day I called Rachel and invited her and Jonathan to dinner at my house, a peace offering. She accepted immediately, the relief in her voice palpable. I'm so glad you're giving him a chance, Mom, she said. You'll see he's wonderful once you get to know him. That evening I played the role of contrite mother perfectly. I served Jonathan's favorite wine, information Emily had subtly extracted from Rachel, asked about his work with genuine seeming interest, and even brought out old photo albums to show him pictures of Rachel as a child. I'm sorry for how I behaved before, I said as we lingered over dessert. I was just so surprised by how quickly everything happened. But seeing you two together, how happy you make each other, that's all a mother really wants. Jonathan's smile was triumphant beneath the graciousness. Family is everything, Jennifer. I'm just grateful we can move forward together. As they were leaving, I hugged Rachel tightly. I'm so happy for you, sweetheart, I whispered. Thank you, Mom, she replied, tears in her eyes. This means everything to me. When Jonathan embraced me, his whisper was meant to appear warm to any observer, but the words chilled me. Smart move, Jenny. I always knew you were a survivor. I maintained my smile until their car disappeared down the street. Then I closed the door, leaned against it, and let the mask drop. The game had entered a new phase. Jonathan believed he had won. That was exactly what I needed him to believe. The next day, Emily called Rachel and suggested they meet for lunch. I can't, Rachel replied. Jonathan and I are meeting with the wedding planner. Oh, that's exciting, Emily said with forced enthusiasm. How about dinner next week? I'd love to hear all the details. Rachel hesitated. I'll have to check with Jonathan. He's been so busy with work, and we're trying to spend every free moment together before the wedding. Of course, Emily replied. Just let me know. When Rachel never called back, Emily knew Jonathan had blocked the attempt, just as we'd expected. Our next move was more direct. Patricia arranged for a colleague to approach Jonathan at his office, posing as a private investigator hired by a concerned family member. Mr. Harris, the investigator said after being shown into Jonathan's office. I've been retained to look into your background. Jonathan's expression remained perfectly pleasant. Really? By whom? I'm not at liberty to say, but I wanted to meet with you personally because I've completed my investigation and found nothing concerning. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. Is that so? Indeed. Your credentials are impeccable, your business solid. I'll be reporting back that there's no cause for concern." The investigator stood to leave. "Congratulations on your upcoming wedding, by the way. Ms. King seems like a remarkable woman." As predicted, Jonathan called me immediately after the meeting. "Did you hire someone to investigate me?" he demanded, his voice icily controlled. I feigned surprise. "What? No. Why would I do that after we've made peace?" "Someone did." "It wasn't me, Jonathan. Maybe Rachel did. She's always been cautious about relationships after what happened with her ex." There was a long pause. "No, Rachel trusts me completely." "Then I don't know who it could be. But I assure you, it wasn't me." I paused. "Did they find anything?" "Nothing," Jonathan replied, his voice returning to its usual smoothness, as there was nothing to find. "Well, that's good then, isn't it? Clears the air completely." After we hung up, I called Patricia. "He took the bait. He thinks someone investigated him and found nothing." "Good," Patricia replied. "Now he'll feel invincible. That's when these types make mistakes." 2 days later, Rachel called me, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Mom, can you come over? Jonathan's out of town on business until tomorrow, and I need to talk to you." My heart raced. "Of course, sweetheart, I'll be right there." When I arrived at Rachel's apartment, she was sitting on her couch, staring at a photo of her and Jonathan. Her eyes were red from crying. "Rachel, what's wrong?" I asked, sitting beside her. She turned to me, her expression a mixture of confusion and pain. "Jonathan asked me to sign some papers for the wedding. Joint accounts, power of attorney, insurance beneficiaries. He said it's standard procedure, that all couples do this before getting married." "That sounds reasonable," I said carefully, not wanting to push too hard. But when I told him I wanted my lawyer to review them first, he got strange. Not angry exactly, but cold. He said if I trusted him, I wouldn't need a lawyer to come between us. She wiped away a tear. Then he apologized, said he was just stressed about the wedding, and flew to New York for this sudden business meeting. I took her hands in mine. "What does your heart tell you, Rachel?" "That's the thing, Mom. For the first time since I met Jonathan, my heart and my head are saying different things." She looked at me searchingly. "You never really liked him, did you? Even when you pretended to accept him." I chose my words with extreme care. "I want you to be happy, Rachel. That's all I've ever wanted." "That's not an answer." "No," I admitted. "It's not." I took a deep breath. "Rachel, there are things about Jonathan that concern me deeply, but I'm afraid if I tell you, you'll think I'm trying to sabotage your relationship." Rachel was silent for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked to her desk, retrieving a folder. "I found this in Jonathan's briefcase last night," she said, handing it to me. "I wasn't snooping. The clasp broke and everything fell out. This was among his papers." I opened the folder to find photos of me, at the grocery store, walking to my car, leaving my house. Surveillance photos. "Why would he have these?" Rachel whispered. I closed the folder, my hands shaking. "Rachel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen with an open mind. It's about Jonathan, and it's about our past." But before I could continue, Rachel's phone rang. Jonathan's name flashed on the screen. "Don't answer it," I said quickly. Rachel stared at the phone, then at me, indecision clear on her face. Just as it seemed she would reject the call, her training as an attorney kicked in. "If I don't answer, he'll know something's wrong," she said logically. "Let me handle this." She put the phone on speaker. "Hi, honey." "Rachel." Jonathan's voice was warm through the speaker. "I miss you already. How's your day going?" "Fine. Just catching up on some work at home." That's my dedicated attorney. "Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation before I left. I was insensitive about the legal documents. Of course you should have your lawyer review them. I want everything to be transparent between us." Rachel's eyes widened in surprise. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that." I just want you to feel secure. Oh, by the way, have you spoken to your mother today? The casual way he slipped in the question made my blood run cold. No, Rachel lied smoothly. Why do you ask? No reason. I just thought about calling her to see if she'd like to have lunch when I get back. Build our relationship a bit more before the wedding. That's thoughtful. I'm sure she'd like that. Perfect. I'll call her tomorrow. I love you, Rachel. Love you too. When she hung up, Rachel turned to me, her attorney's mind working quickly. He knows I'm with you. Somehow he knows. Rachel, I said urgently, we need to talk, but not here, not now. She nodded, grabbing her purse. My office. The conference room has a security system that checks for bugs. As we drove separately to her law firm, my phone rang. It was Emily. Mrs. King, someone broke into my apartment today. Nothing was taken, but all my files were searched. The only thing I had related to Jonathan was the background information you gave me. Are you okay? I asked, alarmed. I'm fine. I wasn't home, but this is escalating quickly. Meet us at Rachel's office. Now. An hour later, Rachel, Emily, Patricia, and I sat in the secure conference room. The blinds were drawn, and Rachel had conducted a thorough sweep for listening devices. Tell me everything, Rachel said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. And don't leave anything out. I started at the beginning. James Reynolds, the money he stole, the investigation that revealed his true identity, the pattern of targeting family members of previous victims. With each revelation, Rachel's face grew paler, but she remained composed, the brilliant attorney taking in every detail. Patricia presented the evidence methodically, the photographs, financial records, testimonials from other victims, the timeline that showed Jonathan's systematic approach to inserting himself into Rachel's life. When we finished, Rachel sat in silence for several long moments. I need to think, she said finally. This is overwhelming. I know it is, I said gently. And I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, she replied, her voice hardening. If what you're saying is true, this man has been playing me for months, manipulating me, isolating me, planning to steal everything I've worked for. And turning you against me, I added softly. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I'm so sorry. The things I said to you, it's not your fault. Jonathan is a master manipulator. He's done this to many women, all of them intelligent, successful people. Rachel wiped her eyes, her expression shifting from devastation to determination. So what do we do? How do we stop him? Patricia leaned forward. We've been building a case, but it's challenging. These men are experts at covering their tracks. What we need is for him to incriminate himself. A sting operation, Rachel said immediately. I'm the bait. Absolutely not, I countered. It's too dangerous. Mom, I'm a trial attorney. I can handle myself. This isn't a courtroom, Rachel. This is a man who's been planning his revenge for 7 years. He's dangerous in ways you can't imagine. Actually, Patricia interjected, I think we need to consider something else. She looked at me solemnly. Jennifer, there's something I haven't told you yet. My stomach tightened. What is it? I've been in contact with an FBI agent, David Taylor. He's Catherine Chen's cousin, and he's been building a federal case against Jonathan for years. The FBI is involved? I asked, surprised. Jonathan's crimes cross state lines. Identity theft, fraud, wire transfers. But there's more. Patricia hesitated. David has reason to believe Jonathan may be responsible for more than financial crimes. The room went silent. What are you saying? Rachel asked, her voice barely audible. 3 of Jonathan's former fiancés died within a year of his disappearance. Accidents, supposedly. 1 car crash, 1 drowning, 1 fall downstairs. All ruled accidental, but the statistical probability... Oh my God, Emily whispered. My mind flashed to the surveillance photos of me. The casual mention of accidents during our conversations. The calculated way Jonathan had isolated Rachel from everyone who cared about her. He's not just a con man, I said slowly. He's eliminating witnesses. Patricia nodded grimly. And establishing a pattern. Target woman, steal assets, disappear. Then if anyone starts asking questions, they have an unfortunate accident, Rachel finished, legal training allowing her to process the horror analytically. We need to meet with this FBI agent, I decided. Now. David Taylor arrived at Rachel's office within the hour. In his early 40s, with a serious demeanor and watchful eyes, he'd been tracking Jonathan's activities across 5 states. We've never been able to definitively link him to the deaths, David explained, spreading his case files across the conference table. But the pattern is unmistakable. And with the family connection, targeting relatives of previous victims, we believe he's systematically eliminating anyone who might identify him. Why hasn't he been arrested? Rachel demanded. Because he's careful. Changes identities completely between cities, never leaves a paper trail, and the dead women can't testify. David looked at her directly. You're the first potential victim we've been able to warn before he completes his operation. So what's the plan? Rachel asked. David outlined a strategy. Rachel would continue her relationship with Jonathan, pretending she suspected nothing. Meanwhile, the FBI would monitor all communications, gather evidence, and prepare to move in before Jonathan could either steal Rachel's money or harm her physically. It's too risky, I objected immediately. We're talking about using my daughter as bait for a potential killer. Mom, I want to do this, Rachel insisted. He's hurt too many women, destroyed too many lives. She took my hand, including yours. There's something else you should know, David added quietly. Jonathan has a pattern with the wedding timing. 1 week before the ceremony, he convinces the bride to transfer assets to joint accounts for wedding expenses. The night before the final transfer, he disappears with everything. October 8th, I said. That's 5 days from now. Which means we have very little time to set our trap, David confirmed. For the next 3 days, Rachel played the role of unsuspecting bride perfectly. She agreed to Jonathan's financial arrangements, but accidentally delayed the paperwork. She maintained her normal routine, all while wearing a sophisticated tracking device provided by the FBI. Jonathan, meanwhile, seemed completely unaware of our knowledge. He returned from New York bearing gifts, more attentive and loving than ever. He even called me, suggesting we have lunch again before the wedding. I really want us to bond, Jennifer, he said warmly. Family is so important to Rachel. And to me, I replied, matching his tone. How about Friday? I know a lovely little restaurant. Perfect, just the 2 of us. After hanging up, I turned to David, who had been monitoring the call. Friday, the day before he plans to disappear with Rachel's money. He's setting up his final moves, David agreed, making sure you're occupied while he completes the transfers. I don't like this, I said for what felt like the 100th time. There are too many variables, too many ways this could go wrong. We have agents watching Rachel 24/7, David assured me. Jonathan won't be able to harm her. It's not just physical harm I'm worried about, I replied. What this will do to her emotionally. David's expression softened slightly. Mrs. King, I've seen what happens to women after Jonathan finishes with them. The financial devastation, the psychological trauma. Some never recover. He looked at the photos of previous victims. Your daughter is strong, but no one is strong enough to withstand that kind of betrayal without scars. I knew he was right. The plan would proceed. But I also knew something the others didn't. I had my own contingency strategy. Because no matter how well the FBI had planned this operation, I wasn't leaving my daughter's safety in anyone's hands but my own. On Thursday night, I received an unexpected call. Rachel, her voice tight with controlled panic. Mom, something's wrong. Jonathan asked me to meet him at his apartment tonight to sign the final transfer papers. He's never asked me over this late before. Don't go, I said immediately. I have to. The FBI wants me to get him on record discussing the transfers. David says it's our best chance to prove intent. Rachel, I don't care what the FBI says. This is too dangerous. There was a pause. Then Rachel's voice became softer. Mom, do you remember what you used to tell me before my big cases? Sometimes the scariest moments are when we do our most important work. My own words coming back to me felt like a physical blow. This isn't a courtroom, Rachel. No, it's more important than that. It's justice for you, for all the women he's hurt. I can do this, Mom. I need to do this. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, torn between respecting my daughter's decision and my overwhelming need to protect her. In the end, I did what any mother would do. I called Patricia. I need a favor, I said. One that doesn't involve the FBI. At 9:30 that night, Rachel arrived at Jonathan's downtown apartment building. From a van parked across the street, David, Patricia, and I watched on monitors as she entered the lobby. She's wearing a wire, David reminded me. We can hear everything. At the first sign of trouble, we move in. I nodded, too anxious to speak. The elevator indicator showed Rachel ascending to the 15th floor. Minutes stretched like hours as we waited. Finally, Jonathan's voice came through the speakers. Rachel, right on time. Come in, I've got the papers ready. Thanks, Rachel replied, her voice remarkably steady. I'm excited to get this finalized before the wedding. Me too. Wine? Please. We listened as Jonathan explained the transfer documents, his voice smooth and reassuring. Rachel asked appropriate questions, playing the role of trusting fiancé perfectly. So once I sign these, all my accounts will be merged with yours? She asked. Exactly. It simplifies everything for our future together. One household, one financial plan. And this power of attorney? Just a precaution. If anything happened to you, I'd be able to manage everything without legal complications. I gripped the armrest of my seat, my knuckles white. The casual way he discussed taking control of Rachel's life was chilling. It all makes sense, Rachel said. But before I sign, can I ask you something personal? Of course, anything. Have you ever been married before? There was a slight pause. No. Why do you ask? It's just, you seem so knowledgeable about all this, like you've done it before. Jonathan's laugh was perfectly calibrated, slightly surprised but not defensive. I'm a financial consultant, Rachel. I help people with these arrangements every day. People like my mother? The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. What about your mother? Jonathan finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. You knew her before, didn't you? In 2018, when she was Jennifer Thompson. David tensed beside me. This wasn't part of the script they'd prepared. Rachel, he muttered into his microphone. Stick to the plan. But Rachel continued, her voice growing stronger. You stole $75,000 from her after her husband died. You pretended to love her, then disappeared. Rachel, I don't know what you're talking about, Jonathan said, but there was a new edge to his voice. Has your mother been filling your head with these ideas? No, I figured it out myself. The surveillance photos of her in your briefcase. The way you manipulated me into uninviting her to our wedding. It's all part of your pattern, isn't it? What pattern? Targeting the families of your previous victims. Catherine Chen's aunt, Jennifer Walsh's sister, and now, my mother. Jonathan's voice hardened completely. Who have you been talking to? It doesn't matter. What matters is I know what you are. I know what you've done. You don't know anything, Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register I'd never heard before. And neither does your mother, or anyone else who's been whispering in your ear. We're moving in, David said into his radio, already heading for the door. All units go. I followed close behind him, ignoring his orders to stay in the van. Nothing could keep me from my daughter now. As we raced toward the building, Rachel's voice continued through our earpieces, strong and clear. You're wrong, Jonathan. We know everything. The FBI has been building a case against you for years. They know about the women who died after you robbed them. Prove it, he said quietly. I don't have to prove anything. I just have to walk away and let justice take its course. No one walks away from me, Rachel. Not you, not your mother, not anyone. The elevator seemed to crawl as we ascended to the 15th floor. David and 4 agents with weapons drawn, me behind them praying we weren't too late. You won't get away with this, Rachel was saying as we reached the door. Too many people know the truth now. It doesn't matter, Jonathan replied, his voice eerily calm. By this time tomorrow, I'll be gone, and so will you. The FBI agents burst through the door shouting commands. I pushed past them to reach Rachel, who stood facing Jonathan across his living room, her expression a mixture of disgust and triumph. Jonathan barely reacted to the agents surrounding him. His eyes were fixed on me. Hello, Jenny, he said softly. I've been wondering when you'd show up. As they handcuffed him, his smile never faltered. You were too late, you know. The transfer is already complete. By the time your lawyers untangle it, the money will be gone. Rachel stepped forward, her attorney's smile razor sharp. Actually, she said, you were the one who was too late. She pulled out her phone, showing him the screen. The papers you had me sign were fake, props created by the FBI. My trust fund is exactly where it's always been. For the first time, Jonathan's confidence cracked. That's impossible. What's impossible, Rachel continued, is that you thought I wouldn't notice my own mother conducting a surveillance operation. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but steel in her voice. I've known something was wrong for weeks. I just needed proof. As the agents led Jonathan away, he looked back at me one last time. This isn't over, Jenny. Not by a long shot. I watched him go. This man who'd haunted my life for 7 years, and felt an odd mixture of relief and lingering fear. Because despite all our precautions, despite the FBI's involvement, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jonathan Harris, or whatever his real name was, wasn't the kind of man who stayed caught for long. Patricia's investigation over the next week revealed a pattern so disturbing I could barely sleep. Jonathan Harris wasn't just a con man. He was a predator who specifically targeted women at their most vulnerable moments. Look at this, Patricia said, spreading photographs across my dining room table. Denver, 2023. Rebecca Morrison, 34, recently divorced, inherited her grandmother's antique jewelry business. Jonathan showed up 6 months after her divorce was finalized. The photo showed a lovely blonde woman with kind eyes, standing next to a man I now recognized as my daughter's fiancé. He looked exactly the same as he did now, like he'd found some fountain of youth. Nashville, 2022. Jennifer Walsh, 38, lost her husband in a motorcycle accident, collected a substantial life insurance payout. Another photo, another beautiful woman, same predatory smile on Jonathan's face. Phoenix, 2020. Catherine Chen, 36, tech executive who just sold her startup. The pattern was unmistakable. Successful women between 30 and 40, recent life changes, substantial assets, just like Rachel, who'd recently made partner at her law firm and whose trust fund was approaching maturity. What happened to them? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Rebecca lost $180,000. Her business collapsed within 6 months of him disappearing. She's working as a waitress now. Jennifer? Lost her house, had to move back in with her parents. Catherine? Patricia paused. Catherine had a nervous breakdown. She's still in therapy. I closed my eyes, imagining Rachel's face when she discovered the man she loved had destroyed her life. The betrayal would break something fundamental in her, just like it had been broken in me 7 years ago. There's something else, Patricia continued. I found records of him using different names. Before Jonathan Harris, he was James Sterling, then Jason Stone, then James Reynolds. Different initials each time. Makes him harder to track, I observed. Exactly. But here's the interesting part. In every case, he disappeared exactly 1 week before the wedding. 1 week, like clockwork. Gets them to consolidate their accounts for wedding expenses, transfers everything to a joint account for their new life together, then vanishes the night before the final transfer. I stared at the calendar on my phone. October 15th was 12 days away. We don't have much time, I said. Actually, we do. If he sticks to pattern, he won't make his move until October 8th. That gives us 5 more days to gather evidence. But evidence of what? Even if we proved Jonathan Harris was really James Reynolds, Rachel is so thoroughly convinced I'm the villain that she probably think I'd fabricated everything out of spite. I needed to expand my search for allies. I called Emily Morrison, Rachel's best friend since law school. "Emily, it's Jennifer King," I said when she answered. "I need to talk to you about something important. It's about Rachel." We met at a quiet coffee shop far from Rachel's usual haunts. Emily had always been a practical, level-headed woman, the perfect counterbalance to Rachel's occasional impulsiveness. "What's going on, Mrs. King?" she asked after we'd ordered. "You sounded worried on the phone." "I'm worried," I admitted. "Has Rachel seemed different to you lately, since she started dating Jonathan?" Emily's expression grew serious. "Now that you mention it, yes. She's been canceling our plans more often. When we do meet, she seems distracted, and she stopped talking about work, which used to be her favorite topic." She leaned forward. "Is something wrong with Jonathan?" I took a deep breath. "Emily, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound unbelievable, but I need you to listen with an open mind." For the next hour, I explained everything. My history with James Reynolds, the evidence Patricia had uncovered, my fears for Rachel. To her credit, Emily listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "That's a lot to take in," she said finally, "but it explains something strange that happened last month." "What?" "2 of Rachel's college friends contacted me. They said some investment guy had been asking questions about Rachel, about her finances, her family. I told Rachel about it, but she just laughed it off, said Jonathan was probably planning some kind of surprise." My blood ran cold. He's mapping her entire life, building a complete picture. "Mrs. King, what can I do to help?" "Keep being her friend," I says. "Don't push too hard about Jonathan. She'll just pull away more. But be there, keep the connection open, and if she mentions anything about financial arrangements for the wedding, I'll let you know immediately," Emily promised. "And I'll keep an eye out for anything unusual." Having Emily on our side was a crucial step, but I needed to understand more about Jonathan's pattern. If he truly was targeting the families of previous victims, there had to be a reason beyond simple financial gain. Patricia and I spent the next day researching his previous aliases, creating a timeline of his activities. The pattern was chillingly clear. In each case, he'd identified a vulnerable woman with significant assets, moved quickly to gain her trust, isolated her from friends and family, then disappeared with her money. But the family connection was new. In the past 3 years, he'd specifically targeted women related to his previous victims. Catherine Chen's aunt, Jennifer Walsh's sister, and now, my daughter. "It's not just about money anymore," Patricia observed as we reviewed the evidence. "This is personal. It's about revenge, about proving he can destroy entire families." "But why?" I asked. "Why go to such elaborate lengths?" Patricia's expression was grim. "Some predators hunt for necessity. Others hunt for sport. Jonathan Harris hunts for pleasure." The more we uncovered, the more alarming the picture became. Jonathan hadn't just researched Rachel. He'd been studying me for years. Bank records showed he'd been in Chicago for 8 months before accidentally meeting Rachel at her gym, suggesting he'd been planning this operation long before he executed it. "We need to confront him," I said finally. "Force his hand before he can hurt Rachel." "That's risky," Patricia warned. "Men like this are most dangerous when cornered." "I know, but I can't sit by and watch him destroy my daughter's life. I stood up, my mind made up. I need to make him reveal his true nature, and I think I know how. I chose the restaurant carefully, upscale enough that Jonathan would feel comfortable, quiet enough that our conversation wouldn't be overheard, but public enough that he couldn't lose his temper completely. When he arrived 5 minutes late, I was already seated at a corner table with my back to the wall. "Jennifer," he said with that practiced charm, kissing my cheek like we were old friends. "Thank you for reaching out. Rachel was so happy when I told her about your call." "I owe you an apology," I began, playing the contrite mother perfectly. "I realize I came across as hostile Sunday night. It wasn't fair to you." Jonathan settled into his chair, studying me with those calculating blue eyes. "I understand completely. Rachel is lucky to have a mother who cares so much about her welfare." "She is my whole world," I said truthfully. "After her father died, she became everything to me. Maybe too much." "Loss can make us protective," he agreed. "But Rachel is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions about love." The waiter came and went, leaving us with wine and small talk about the weather. I waited until Jonathan seemed relaxed before I made my first move. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Of course. Have you ever been in love before?" For just a split second, something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like recognition. "Once," he said carefully. "Many years ago, but it didn't work out." "What happened?" I pressed gently. "She was older, going through a difficult time. I thought I could help her heal, but..." He shrugged elegantly. "Sometimes timing is everything." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression sympathetic. He was talking about me, but describing it like a failed romance instead of the financial devastation he'd caused. That must have been painful. It was. But you know what they say, everything happens for a reason. If that relationship hadn't ended, I might not have been ready to appreciate someone as special as Rachel. I sipped my water, watching him carefully. He seemed genuinely relaxed, almost nostalgic. Either he was an incredible actor, or he actually didn't recognize me. "I'm sure she was lovely," I said carefully. "She was beautiful, intelligent, vulnerable. She'd recently lost her husband and was struggling with grief." "How sad. What was her name?" "Jennifer, actually." His eyes met mine with what looked like innocent coincidence. "Jennifer Thompson, though she went by Jenny. Funny how life works, isn't it? Here I am, about to marry the daughter of another Jennifer." The blood drained from my face so quickly I thought I might faint. He knew. He'd known all along who I was, but his expression remained perfectly pleasant, almost fond. "Small world, isn't it?" I stared at him, my mind racing. When had he figured it out? The engagement party? "You remember her?" I whispered. "Of course I do. I've thought about her often over the years. Wondered what happened to her, whether she ever found happiness again." He leaned forward slightly. "I hope she did. She deserved better than what I gave her." The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. This wasn't the confrontation I'd expected. Where was the threat, the menace, the calculating predator? "Why?" I breathed. Jonathan's smile was sad, almost wistful. "Because I was young and stupid and thought money mattered more than people. I've regretted it every day since." He signaled the waiter for the check, then looked back at me with what seemed like genuine emotion. "If you ever see her again, Jennifer, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I became the man she deserved. Too late to matter." As he stood to leave, he placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "Thank you for lunch and for giving me a chance. Rachel is lucky to have a mother who loves her so much." As I watched him walk away, I sat in stunned confusion. Either Jonathan Harris was the greatest actor who'd ever lived, or something had fundamentally changed about him in the past 7 years. But as I replayed the conversation in my mind, one thing became crystal clear. He absolutely knew who I was, and for reasons I couldn't understand, He was playing a completely different game than I'd expected. I sat in that restaurant for 20 minutes after Jonathan left, my mind spinning with confusion. His performance had been flawless, full of remorse and apparent growth. But 7 years of healing from his betrayal had taught me to recognize manipulation in all its forms, even when it came wrapped in apologies. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Mom, Jonathan said lunch went beautifully. He's so grateful you're giving him a chance. I'm so happy we can all be family. Love you." The manipulation was evolving. Instead of threats, he was using apparent vulnerability and remorse to lower my guard, make me question my own instincts. I drove straight to Patricia's office. She took one look at my face and knew something had shifted. "He's playing a completely different game," I said, and told her everything about lunch. Patricia frowned. "The reformed bad boy angle. That's sophisticated. But he definitely knew who I was. Absolutely. The Jennifer Thompson reference, the details about your grief. That wasn't coincidence. He's been planning this approach since he identified you." I paced her office. "So what's his real endgame? If he's genuinely changed, why target Rachel specifically?" "Because he hasn't changed. Jennifer, men like this don't develop consciences. They develop better strategies." Patricia pulled out a new file. "I've been digging deeper into his recent years. Want to know what's interesting? Every one of his victims in the past 5 years has been the daughter or close relative of a previous victim." The blood drained from my face. "What?" Phoenix 2020. Catherine Chen's victim wasn't random. Her aunt Linda Chen was scammed by Jonathan in Portland 2019. Nashville, Jennifer Walsh. Her sister, Emma Walsh, was his victim in Atlanta 2021. "He's been systematically targeting families," I whispered. "It's not about money anymore, Jennifer. It's about power, about proving he can destroy entire family lines." I sank into a chair, the full scope of his revenge becoming clear. "And Rachel is just the latest branch on my family tree. There's more. I found records of him researching your life extensively. He knows about Rachel's law practice, her trust fund, her friends, her habits. This isn't opportunistic. It's surgical." Patricia spread out more documents. "He's been in Chicago for 8 months, but he waited 6 months to accidentally meet Rachel at the gym. That's planning, not coincidence." My hands trembled as I flipped through the evidence. Photos of Jonathan with various women, financial records showing substantial withdrawals, newspaper clippings about sudden deaths that made my stomach turn. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need more information," Patricia said grimly. "I have a contact at the FBI who might be interested in this pattern." She made a call, speaking in low tones about interstate fraud, identity theft, and a pattern of suspicious deaths. When she hung up, her expression was grim but determined. "Agent David Taylor will meet us tomorrow morning. He's been tracking similar cases and believes there may be a connection." That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. What if Jonathan was planning something far worse than financial fraud? What if Rachel was in physical danger? Early the next morning, I met Patricia at a small coffee shop near her office. Agent Taylor was already there, a serious-looking man in his early 40s with watchful eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. King," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "Patricia has briefed me on your situation. I'm very interested in what you've discovered about Jonathan Harris." For the next hour, I recounted everything, from my first encounter with James Reynolds to the recent lunch with Jonathan. Taylor took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he pulled out a file of his own. "I've been tracking a pattern of romance fraud cases that cross state lines. The MO is consistent, targeting vulnerable women, quick engagements, financial devastation. But in the past few years, something has changed." He spread photographs across the table. These 6 women were all victims of romance fraud. All reported losing substantial amounts of money to a charming investment consultant who disappeared right before their weddings. I nodded. That fits Jonathan's pattern. Here's where it gets disturbing, Taylor continued, pulling out another set of photos. These 3 women died within 18 months of being defrauded, all ruled as accidents. I stared at the photos, a chill running through me. Accidents? 1 car crash, brake failure on a mountain road, 1 drowning. The victim allegedly took sleeping pills and fell asleep in her bath. 1 fall downstairs in her home. Taylor's voice was grim. All statistically unlikely accidents, all happening to women who were actively trying to track down the man who defrauded them. You think he killed them? Patricia asked quietly. I think these aren't coincidences. And I think Jonathan Harris isn't just a con man. He's eliminating witnesses who might identify him across different identities. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. And now he's targeting Rachel. Not just Rachel, Taylor said, looking at me directly. You, Mrs. King. The surveillance photos Patricia found in his briefcase weren't just about monitoring Rachel. They were about tracking you. I felt the blood drain from my face. Me? You're the one who got away, Taylor explained. The one who reported him 7 years ago, who might recognize him and expose him. That makes you dangerous. So this whole engagement to Rachel, I began. Maybe a complex plan to eliminate both of you, Taylor finished. Financial devastation for Rachel, followed by an accident later, and perhaps an accident for you too, once he secured Rachel's assets. The room seemed to spin around me. We need to get Rachel away from him. Carefully, Taylor cautioned. If Harris suspects we're on to him, he might accelerate his timeline. We need solid evidence before we move. But Rachel's in danger every moment she's with him. We can protect her without alerting Harris, Taylor assured me. I can arrange discreet surveillance. Meanwhile, we build our case. Patricia has already compiled impressive evidence linking his different identities. What about Rachel? I asked. She won't believe any of this. He's turned her completely against me. Patricia and Taylor exchanged looks. That might be changing, Patricia said. Emily Morrison called me this morning. Rachel found something in Jonathan's briefcase, those surveillance photos of you. She's starting to ask questions. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. She's seeing through him? Let's not rush things, Taylor cautioned. But it gives us an opening. If Rachel is beginning to doubt Harris on her own, she'll be more receptive when we present our evidence. We spent the rest of the morning crafting a strategy. Taylor would mobilize FBI resources to monitor Jonathan and protect Rachel. Patricia would continue building the evidence linking his different identities, and I would wait for the right moment to reconnect with my daughter. As we were finishing, Taylor's phone rang. His expression grew serious as he listened. When? He asked. Then are you sure? After hanging up, he turned to us, his face grim. One of my agents has been monitoring Harris's financial activities. He just made a large purchase from a chemical supply company, a compound that in the right concentration can induce cardiac symptoms indistinguishable from a natural heart attack. My blood ran cold. He's planning to kill someone. And given the timeline of your daughter's wedding, Taylor said quietly, we need to assume he's accelerating his plans. 2 days later, I sat in an FBI conference room, staring at a wall covered with photographs of Jonathan's victims. David Taylor was methodically explaining the charges they were building against him. Identity theft, wire fraud, financial exploitation, conspiracy, he listed, pointing to each section of evidence. We've got enough to put him away for at least 15 years. What about the deaths? I asked quietly. The women who had accidents after he disappeared? David's expression tightened. That's more challenging. We have circumstantial evidence, but nothing concrete enough for murder charges yet. Rachel, who had been quietly reviewing documents, looked up. What if we could get him to confess? He's too smart for that, David replied. He hasn't said a word since his arrest. Maybe to you, Rachel said. But what about to Mom? I felt a chill run through me. What do you mean? He has an obsession with you, Rachel explained. This whole elaborate scheme was about revenge against you. His ego won't let him resist the opportunity to explain how clever he's been. Patricia, who had been silently observing, nodded in agreement. She's right. Men like Jonathan have a psychological need to be acknowledged as superior. If Jennifer confronted him directly, he might reveal more than he intends. Absolutely not, I said firmly. I'm not putting myself in a room with that man. You wouldn't be alone, David assured me. We'd monitor everything. At the first sign of trouble, we'd pull you out. I don't like it, I insisted. There has to be another way. Mom, Rachel said gently, we need to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Ever. She reached across the table and took my hand. You're the one person he might actually talk to. I looked around at their expectant faces and felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just about me anymore, or even Rachel. It was about all the women whose lives Jonathan had destroyed. What would I need to do? I asked finally. The plan was deceptively simple. I would visit Jonathan in custody wearing a wire. The conversation would be monitored by David and his team. My goal was to get him to reveal details only the perpetrator could know about the deaths of his previous victims. Don't push too hard, David advised as technicians fitted me with a concealed microphone. Let him lead the conversation. Appeal to his ego. Make him think you're impressed by his scheme, even as it failed. And if he doesn't take the bait? I asked. Then we proceed with the charges we have, David replied. But this is our best shot at justice for everyone he's hurt. As I was escorted to the interview room, my heart pounded so hard I was sure Jonathan would hear it. 7 years ago, I'd been a vulnerable widow, easy to manipulate. Now I was walking deliberately into the lion's den, hoping to outsmart a predator. Jonathan was already seated when I entered, his hands cuffed to the table. Despite his orange jumpsuit and the harsh fluorescent lighting, he maintained that aura of elegant control that had fooled so many women. Jenny, he said, smiling as if we were meeting for lunch. What a pleasant surprise. I sat down across from him, forcing myself to meet his gaze steadily. I needed to see you. Curiosity? Closure? Or just couldn't stay away? His tone was light, almost playful. I want to understand, I said simply. Why Rachel? Why my daughter? Jonathan tilted his head, studying me. Why do you think? Revenge? I replied. Because I was the one who got away, the one who reported you to the police 7 years ago. His smile widened. You flatter yourself, Jenny. You were hardly the only woman to file a police report. Most of them did, after I disappeared with their money. But I was different, I pressed. I wasn't just another mark to you. Something flickered in his eyes, satisfaction that I was playing into his narrative, perhaps. You were memorable. Most women are so desperate for affection they never look beyond the surface. But you had an edge to you even in grief, a skepticism I found challenging. Is that why you came after Rachel? To punish me for seeing through you eventually? Jonathan laughed softly. Punished? No. Think of completing unfinished business. A professional doesn't leave loose ends. The clinical way he referred to destroying lives made my skin crawl, but I kept my expression neutral. Like Catherine Chen? Rebecca Morrison? Jennifer Walsh? Successful business ventures, he replied smoothly. Until they weren't. And the accidents that happened afterward, were those business ventures too? For a fraction of a second his mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating. Then it was gone, replaced by mild amusement. Accidents happen all the time, Jenny. People fall downstairs, drive too fast, swim in dangerous waters. The world is full of hazards. Especially for women who might identify you, I noted. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, the chain of his handcuffs clinking against the table. You know what I find fascinating? How easily people accept coincidence when the alternative is too frightening to contemplate. Like 3 women connected to you dying in accidents within a year of your disappearance? Statistically improbable, he admitted, but not impossible. And impossibility is what courts require for conviction. I changed tactics, remembering David's advice to appeal to his ego. I have to admit, I'm impressed by how thoroughly you researched Rachel. How long were you planning that operation? Pride flickered across his features. Research is the foundation of success in any enterprise. I spent 6 months learning everything about her before our chance meeting at that gym. And me? How long did you watch me before deciding to target my daughter? I never stopped watching you, Jenny. His voice dropped lower. 7 years of monitoring your recovery, your job changes, your painfully small social circle. Waiting for the perfect moment. A chill ran down my spine. That's dedication. I prefer to think of it as professional thoroughness. Loose ends, as I said. Is that what Catherine was? A loose end? His expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. Catherine made poor choices. Like hiring a private investigator after you disappeared with her money. That PI was getting close to identifying you, wasn't he? Before her unfortunate fall down those stairs. Jonathan's smile remained fixed, but something predatory entered his gaze. Some people simply don't know when to let go. They become obsessive, dangerous to themselves. And Jennifer Walsh? Was she obsessive too? Before she drowned in her bathtub? Jenny, he chided softly, you're fishing. It doesn't suit you. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. I'm not fishing, Jonathan. I'm giving you the chance to tell your side, to explain how brilliant you really were. Because we both know those women didn't just happen to die. You arranged it, meticulously, like you arrange everything. His eyes glittered with what might have been appreciation. You understand me better than most, Jenny. You always did. He glanced at the mirror on the wall, undoubtedly knowing it was two-way. But I'm not in the habit of making confessions. Not even to impress me with how you managed it. How you created the perfect accidents that fooled police in 3 different states. Jonathan chuckled. Flattery, Jenny. Now you're trying too hard. I shrugged, feigning indifference. I thought you might want credit for your work. The planning, the execution. Not many people could pull off what you did. He studied me for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Then he leaned back, a decision made. Hypothetically speaking, he began, his voice casual, if someone wanted to arrange an accident that wouldn't raise suspicions, they'd need to understand 3 fundamental principles. He ticked them off on his fingers. First, use the victim's own habits against them. Second, ensure no evidence of outside involvement. Third, establish an alibi that places you far from the scene. My pulse quickened. He was walking into our trap. For instance, I prompted. For instance, if a woman regularly took sleeping pills and enjoyed long baths, perhaps adjusting the dosage and introducing certain elements to cause drowsiness might lead to a tragic but unsurprising accident. His eyes never left mine. Hypothetically, Jennifer Walsh had drowned in her bathtub. The police report had noted the presence of sleeping medication in her system. And a woman who lived in a house with steep stairs? I asked. Hypothetically, certain household products can create nearly invisible slick patches, particularly effective at the top of stairwells, where a momentary loss of balance becomes catastrophic. His smile remained pleasant. But of course I'm speaking purely in theoretical terms. Of course, I agreed. And car accidents? The simplest of all, he replied. Modern vehicles are computerized marvels. The right person with the right knowledge can introduce subtle malfunctions that activate only under specific conditions, like high speeds on curving roads. Rebecca Morrison had died when her car inexplicably accelerated on a mountain curve. That would require specialized knowledge, I observed. Knowledge is power, Jonathan replied smoothly, and power is everything. Is that what this was all about? Power? Everything is about power, Jenny. Some people just pretend otherwise. He tilted his head. Did you think it was about money? I could have taken far more from far easier targets than your daughter. Then why? Because you needed to learn that actions have consequences. You interfered in my business 7 years ago. You filed police reports, spoke to detectives, created complications. His voice remained conversational, but his eyes had turned to ice. I don't forgive complications. So Rachel was just collateral damage in your vendetta against me. Rachel was a means to an end, the perfect instrument to make you understand exactly what you cost me. His smile turned cruel. Imagine how it would have felt, Jenny. Your daughter, devastated financially, emotionally broken, and then a year later, a tragic accident, just like all the others. The room seemed to grow colder as the full scope of his planned revenge became clear. You would have killed her, I whispered. I would have completed the circle, he corrected. Perfectly balanced, as all things should be. I sat back, momentarily overwhelmed by the casual way he discussed murdering my daughter. When I spoke again, my voice was surprisingly steady. There's just one thing I don't understand. Only one? He asked, amused. Why tell me all this now? You must know they're recording everything you say. Jonathan's smile widened. Do you really think anything I've said constitutes admissible evidence, Jenny? I've spoken entirely in hypotheticals. No prosecutor would even attempt to bring charges based on this conversation. Then why have it at all? Because I wanted you to know. His voice dropped to a near whisper. I wanted you to understand exactly what was coming for Rachel. What would have happened if your amateur detective work hadn't accidentally succeeded? He leaned forward. And I wanted you to know it still might. A chill ran through me. You're going to prison. For financial crimes, perhaps. For a time. His confidence was absolute. But I've prepared for contingencies, Jenny. I always do. Before I could respond, the door opened and David entered, signaling the end of our interview. As I stood to leave, Jonathan called after me. Tell Rachel congratulations on her engagement. Such a shame the wedding had to be postponed. His smile was poisonous. I do hope she finds happiness eventually. So few of my brides ever do. Outside the interview room, I collapsed into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. David squeezed my shoulder. You did brilliantly, he said. We got exactly what we needed. He admitted to 3 murders, I said numbly. In hypothetical terms, yes. But combined with the evidence we already had, it's enough to convince a grand jury. David's expression was grim but satisfied. He's not walking away this time, Mrs. King. I promise you that. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, evidence reviews, and exhausting interviews with prosecutors. Jonathan was indicted on multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and, thanks to my recorded conversation, 3 counts of first-degree murder. His bail was denied after prosecutors successfully argued he was both a flight risk and a danger to others. Through it all, Rachel remained remarkably composed, the brilliant attorney in her analyzing each legal development with professional detachment. But I knew my daughter. I could see the cracks in her armor, the moments when her hand would tremble slightly as she reached for her coffee, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Are you okay? I asked one evening as we sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset. Really okay? Rachel was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about how close I came to marrying him, to being another name on that wall of victims. She shuddered slightly. And then I feel stupid for not seeing through him sooner. He fooled me too, I reminded her, and I'd already been burned once. But you figured it out. You started investigating even when I tried to push you away." She turned to me, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I uninvited you to my wedding, Mom. How can you forgive me for that?" I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "There's nothing to forgive. Jonathan manipulated both of us exactly the way he planned. The important thing is that we stopped him before he could finish his scheme. I still can't believe he was planning to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I know," I said softly. "But he failed, Rachel. He failed because we were stronger together than he anticipated." As the criminal case against Jonathan built, we learned more disturbing details about his operation. His real name was Jason Webb, born in Detroit to wealthy parents who had died under suspicious circumstances when he was in his 20s, leaving him a substantial inheritance that had financed his early schemes. Over 15 years, he had targeted at least 12 women across 8 states, stealing an estimated $3.7 million and leaving a trail of devastation. The FBI had linked him conclusively to 5 suspicious deaths, though prosecutors were only bringing charges for 3 where the evidence was strongest. The district attorney assigned to the case, Evelyn Martinez, was a formidable woman in her 50s with a perfect record prosecuting homicide cases. She met with Rachel and me regularly to prepare us for the trial. "He's hired Thomas Bedford," she told us during one such meeting, "one of the top criminal defense attorneys in the country." "Can he win?" I asked anxiously. Evelyn's expression was grim but determined. "Bedford is good, but we have solid evidence, including financial records linking Jason Webb to all 3 murder victims, the recorded conversation where he described the methods, and the pattern of targeting family members of previous victims." She looked at me directly. "Your testimony will be crucial, Mrs. King. He'll try to discredit you, paint you as a vindictive ex-lover inventing stories." "I'm ready," I assured her, though my stomach knotted at the thought. "And Rachel, your testimony about how he isolated you from family and friends, pushed for control of your finances. It establishes his modus operandi perfectly." Rachel nodded, her attorney's mind already analyzing the strategic value of her experience. "Will the other victims testify too?" "Those who survived, yes. We've located 6 women who are willing to speak." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "It won't be easy for any of you, but together, you can stop him from ever harming anyone else." The trial began 3 months later. The media coverage was intense. The story of a serial con man who targeted women and then eliminated them had captured national attention. Each morning, Rachel and I walked through a gauntlet of reporters to enter the courthouse. Inside, Jason Webb sat at the defense table, impeccably groomed in an expensive suit, looking for all the world like the successful businessman he pretended to be. When our eyes met that first day, he smiled slightly, as if we shared a private joke. Thomas Bedford proved every bit as formidable as Evelyn had warned. His cross-examinations were brutal, designed to confuse and intimidate. When it was my turn to testify, he spent hours trying to paint me as emotionally unstable, suggesting I had invented the entire story out of jealousy over my daughter's relationship. "Mrs. King," Bedford said smoothly, "isn't it true that you initially approved of Mr. Webb's relationship with your daughter?" "No," I replied firmly. "I recognized him immediately as the man who had defrauded me 7 years earlier. Yet you invited him to lunch, told him he had your blessing to marry Rachel." "As part of our investigation, yes, to gain his trust." "Ah, your investigation," Bedford said with subtle mockery. "Conducted without any law enforcement credentials, based entirely on your belief that your daughter's fiancé was actually a man you'd briefly dated years earlier." "I didn't date him," I corrected. "He manipulated me during a vulnerable time, stole $75,000, and disappeared." Bedford approached the stand. "Mrs. King, would you describe yourself as protective of your daughter?" "Of course. Perhaps overprotective. Having lost your husband, was Rachel the only family you had left?" I saw his strategy immediately. suggesting I had invented the connection to James Reynolds out of fear of losing my daughter to marriage. My concern was based on recognizing a dangerous man who had already harmed me once, I replied evenly, not on any irrational fear of Rachel getting married. For 2 days, Bedford hammered at my credibility, my motives, my mental stability. Through it all, I maintained my composure, focusing on the facts and refusing to be baited into emotional outbursts. When Rachel took the stand, Bedford changed tactics, portraying her as a career-driven woman who had neglected her relationship, causing Webb to seek financial security measures that she had misinterpreted as fraud. Ms. King, isn't it true that you frequently canceled plans with the defendant due to work commitments? He asked. Occasionally, Rachel conceded. My job as an attorney can be demanding. And isn't it true that the defendant expressed concern about your workaholic tendencies, suggested that perhaps you were avoiding deeper commitment? Rachel's voice was steady. He manipulated my work schedule to isolate me from friends and family. That's a common tactic of abusers. Bedford raised an eyebrow. Did the defendant ever abuse you, Ms. King? Emotional and psychological abuse doesn't leave visible bruises, Mr. Bedford, but it's abuse nonetheless. The most dramatic testimony came from Catherine Chen, who described in detail how Webb had systematically separated her from friends and family, drained her accounts, and disappeared. Then, when she hired a private investigator to find him, she began experiencing strange incidents. Unexplained dizziness, a car that suddenly accelerated while driving, and finally, the accident that nearly killed her. I was at the top of the stairs in my home, she testified. One moment I was fine, the next I was falling. I have no memory of tripping or losing my balance. I just fell. Her voice grew stronger. I survived because my housekeeper arrived early that day. The doctors said if I'd been alone even 30 more minutes, I would have died. When Jason Webb finally took the stand in his own defense, he was the picture of wounded innocence. He spoke eloquently about his love for Rachel, his successful investment business, his shock at being accused of such terrible crimes. He denied ever meeting me before Rachel introduced us, denied any connection to James Reynolds or the other aliases. I fell in love with Rachel King, he said, his voice trembling with apparent emotion. I wanted to build a life with her. These accusations, they're devastating, not just to me, but to the future we planned together. Then it was Evelyn Martinez's turn to cross-examine. Mr. Webb, she began, you've testified that you've never used the name James Reynolds, correct? That's correct. Evelyn approached with a document. I'd like to introduce People's Exhibit 47, a lease agreement for an apartment in Chicago, dated 2017, signed by James Reynolds. She placed it before him. The handwriting analysis has confirmed this is your signature. Would you like to revise your testimony? For just a moment, Webb's confident facade faltered. Then he recovered. I don't recall this document. It could be a forgery. What about People's Exhibit 48? Evelyn continued, presenting another document. A bank account opened in Phoenix under the name James Sterling. Again, with your signature, your fingerprints, and your photograph on the ID used to open it. One by one, Evelyn dismantled his denials, producing irrefutable evidence linking him to each alias, each victim, each city where he had operated his schemes. When she finally played the recording of our conversation in the detention center, the courtroom fell silent as Webb's own voice described exactly how he had murdered 3 women. Those were hypothetical scenarios, Webb protested, his composure finally cracking. I was just speculating about exactly the same methods used to kill 3 women you were financially connected to? Evelyn asked. That's quite a coincidence, isn't it, Mr. Webb? The trial lasted 3 weeks. When the jury retired to deliberate, Rachel, Patricia, David, and I waited in agonizing suspense. Despite the mountain of evidence, there was always the possibility that Bedford's skilled defense had planted enough reasonable doubt. How are you holding up? Patricia asked me quietly as we sat in a small conference room awaiting the verdict. I won't feel safe until he's convicted, I admitted. He's escaped consequences so many times before. Not this time, David assured us. The case is solid. He's not walking away. After just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. As we filed back into the courtroom, Jason Webb sat impassively at the defense table, still projecting confidence. The forewoman stood to deliver the verdict. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Jennifer Walsh, we find the defendant guilty. Rachel gripped my hand tightly. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Rebecca Morrison, we find the defendant guilty. I heard a soft sob from somewhere behind us. Rebecca's mother. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Eliza Collins, we find the defendant guilty. As the forewoman continued through the litany of fraud and identity theft charges, all with the same result, I watched Jason Webb. For the first time since I'd known him, his mask slipped completely. The charming, confident facade crumbled, revealing the cold, calculating predator beneath. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Webb stood slowly. "Your Honor," he began, his voice controlled despite the verdict. "I maintain my innocence of these charges. I am the victim of a vindictive former girlfriend who couldn't accept that I had moved on with her daughter." The judge's expression was stone. "Mr. Webb, the evidence against you is overwhelming. You have preyed upon vulnerable women for years, stealing not just their money, but their sense of security and, in at least 3 cases, their lives." She leaned forward. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered such calculated cruelty." The sentence came down: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for each of the 3 murder convictions, plus an additional 30 years for the fraud charges, to be served consecutively. As the bailiffs led him away, Webb turned to look directly at me, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over, Jenny," he said, just loudly enough for me to hear. Not by a long shot. Despite his words, a weight lifted from my shoulders as I watched him disappear through the courtroom door. Rachel put her arm around me, her own relief palpable. "It's finally over, Mom," she whispered. But I wasn't entirely convinced. Men like Jason Webb didn't give up easily. And something about his final threat lingered in my mind, a shadow that wouldn't quite dissipate. 2 years passed. Rachel had thrown herself into her legal career with renewed passion, specializing in cases involving financial fraud against vulnerable populations. I had found a new purpose as well, working with a support group for victims of romance scams, helping others recognize and avoid predators like Jason Webb. We were healing, separately and together. The nightmares came less frequently. The instinctive fear when the phone rang at odd hours began to fade. Life was returning to normal, or at least a new normal that acknowledged what we had survived. Then came the call that shattered our fragile peace. "Mrs. King? This is Warden Mitchell from Stateville Correctional Center." The grave tone in his voice sent ice through my veins. "I'm calling regarding Jason Webb." "What about him?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "There was an incident this morning. Webb was found unresponsive in his cell. I regret to inform you that he was pronounced dead at 9:47 a.m. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. "Dead? How?" "The preliminary investigation suggests a heart attack, but we're conducting a full autopsy as standard procedure." After hanging up, I sat motionless, trying to process the news. Jason Webb was dead. The threat he had posed was truly over. Why then did I feel no relief? I called Rachel immediately, and within an hour, she, Patricia, and David Taylor were gathered in my living room. "It seems too convenient," Patricia said, voicing the doubt we all felt. "A relatively healthy man in his early 50s suddenly dying of a heart attack?" "Prison is stressful," David pointed out. "And heart conditions can be silent killers." "Or he could have had help," Rachel suggested. He manipulated and defrauded a lot of powerful people, made a lot of enemies. There's another possibility, I said quietly. What if he faked his death? The room fell silent as they considered this. That's, unlikely, David said carefully. Stateville is a maximum security facility. Faking a death there would require an extraordinary level of corruption and planning. Which describes Webb perfectly, Patricia countered. He's been planning escapes for years. What if this is just his most elaborate one yet? David pulled out his phone. Let me make some calls. I still have contacts in the bureau who can verify the details. While David stepped outside to make his calls, Rachel moved to sit beside me on the couch. Mom, are you okay? This has to be bringing up a lot of emotions. I don't know what I feel, I admitted. Relief, maybe? But also unease. Like this is too easy an ending for someone like Webb. I know what you mean, Rachel said. After everything he did, a quiet death in his cell seems almost anticlimactic. David returned, his expression troubled. I spoke with the medical examiner. Webb's body had a specific cardiac anomaly that matched his medical records. The fingerprints also match. All evidence suggests it really is Webb, and he really is dead. So it's over, Rachel said, squeezing my hand. Really, truly over. I nodded, trying to embrace the finality of it. I suppose it is. But that night, alone in my house, the doubt returned. Something about Webb's death felt wrong, like the final move in a chess game I didn't know we were still playing. The next morning, a package arrived by courier. No return address, just my name in typed letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typewritten message. Jenny, if you're reading this, you've been told I'm dead. Perhaps you even believe it. But we both know death is just another type of disappearing act, don't we? I promised you this wasn't over. Some promises must be kept, even from beyond the grave. Watch for me in the shadows. I'll be watching you. J. My hands trembled as I set the letter down. It could be a cruel hoax, a final twist of the knife from a man who knew he was dying. Or it could be something far more sinister. Evidence that somehow, impossibly, Jason Webb had orchestrated his greatest escape yet. I called David immediately. Within hours, FBI agents had collected the letter and packaging for analysis. The investigation into Webb's death was reopened with additional autopsies, DNA testing, and a complete review of security footage from the prison. A week later, David came to my house personally to deliver the results. It's definitely Webb who died, he assured me, sitting across from Rachel and me at my kitchen table. The DNA is conclusive. Multiple identifying features confirm it. Old injuries, dental records, everything. Then the letter, I asked, was written by Webb, but likely before his death. The paper and ink suggest it was prepared months ago. David's expression was sympathetic. It was his final mind game, Jennifer. A way to ensure he continued to haunt you even after he was gone. How did he arrange for it to be delivered right after his death was announced? Rachel asked. He had outside accomplices. We've identified a former cellmate who was released 6 months ago. He admitted Webb paid him to mail the letter to a courier service upon hearing news of Webb's death. David shook his head. Even at the end, he was manipulating situations, pulling strings. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt a profound weariness. So it really is over. It's over, David confirmed. Jason Webb is dead. His games are finished. In the months that followed, I gradually began to accept the truth. The monster who had upended my life twice was truly gone. The shadows where I imagined his watching eyes were just shadows after all. The unidentified cars that I sometimes thought were following me were just random vehicles going about their business. Rachel flourished in her legal career, eventually being named partner at her firm. She specialized in elder law and financial protection for vulnerable adults, turning her traumatic experience into a mission to help others. And me? I found purpose in speaking at victim advocacy groups, sharing my story to help others recognize the signs of predatory behavior. The support group I joined became one I helped lead, creating a community for survivors to heal together. 3 years after Webb's death, Rachel met someone new, a kind, transparent man who worked as a pediatric surgeon. When she brought him to dinner at my house for the first time, I watched them interact with the careful eye of someone who had learned to spot manipulation. "What do you think?" Rachel asked when they left, clearly seeking my approval. "He seems genuine," I said cautiously. "But take your time. Get to know him slowly." Rachel smiled. "I already ran a complete background check. So did Emily and Patricia. And I'm pretty sure you did too." I laughed, not denying it. "We've earned the right to be careful." "We have," Rachel agreed. "But we've also earned the right to be happy again." She was right. The fear that had defined so much of our lives after Webb couldn't be allowed to poison our future. Trust would always come harder for us. Verification would always be our first instinct, but we couldn't let that stop us from living fully. 1 year later, I stood in the back of a small chapel, watching Rachel walk down the aisle toward her future husband. Her face glowed with a happiness I hadn't seen in years, a happiness untainted by manipulation or hidden agendas. As she passed me, she squeezed my hand. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. "We saved each other," I replied. And it was true. My daughter and I had faced a monster together and survived. We'd learned that the most dangerous predators often wear the most charming disguises, but we'd also learned that love, real love, was stronger than any manipulation. After the ceremony, as guests mingled at the reception, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The night air was cool and clear, stars visible above the city lights. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. A soft voice behind me broke into my thoughts. "Mrs. King?" I turned to find Catherine Chen, one of Webb's survivors who had testified at the trial. We had stayed loosely connected through the survivors' network. "Catherine, I didn't know you were here." "Rachel invited several of us," she explained. "The survivors. We've become a sort of family, haven't we?" I nodded, understanding completely. Bound by a shared experience no one else can truly understand. "I wanted to thank you," Catherine said. "None of us would have gotten justice if you hadn't recognized him that day. If you hadn't been brave enough to investigate, to persist even when your own daughter doubted you." "I was just protecting what I loved," I said simply. Catherine smiled. "That's what makes predators like Webb so dangerous. They count on our love being a weakness they can exploit. You turned it into strength instead." As she walked back inside, I remained under the stars, thinking about her words. Love as strength, not weakness. It was a lesson I wished I could share with the grieving widow I had been 7 years ago, so vulnerable to James Reynolds' manipulation. But perhaps the lesson wasn't mine alone to learn. Perhaps it was one I could share with other potential victims, other vulnerable people who might otherwise fall prey to predators like Webb. The next day, I started writing my story, not just for myself or for Rachel, but for anyone who might recognize the warning signs in their own relationships. I called it The Predator's Pattern: How I Survived a Con Man's Ultimate Revenge. The book became a surprise bestseller, featured on talk shows and in book clubs across the country. Letters poured in from readers who had recognized their own situations in my story and found the courage to escape manipulative relationships. 5 years after Jason Webb's death, I stood at a podium addressing a conference on fraud prevention and victim advocacy. Looking out at the sea of faces, I saw not just professionals but survivors, men and women who had faced their own predators and lived to tell the tale. "The most important thing I learned," I told them, "is that predators like Jason Webb count on our silence. They count on our shame, our fear, our unwillingness to admit we've been fooled. But when we speak up, when we share our stories, we take away their power." As I spoke, I noticed a woman in the back row, her face half hidden by a scarf despite the warm room. Something about her intense gaze caught my attention, something familiar that sent a chill down my spine. After my talk, as people gathered to ask questions, I looked for her, but she had vanished. Perhaps she was just another survivor, uncomfortable with public attention. Or perhaps she was a reminder that vigilance would always be part of my life now. Either way, I refused to let fear control me again. Jason Webb had taken enough from me, from Rachel, from all his victims. He would not take our future as well. That evening, Rachel called. "Mom, I have some news," she said, her voice vibrating with happiness. "I'm pregnant." Joy flooded through me. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." "We're having a girl," she continued, "and we want to name her Jennifer, after the strongest woman I know." Tears filled my eyes. "I'm honored. We'll teach her everything we've learned," Rachel said softly. "How to be strong, how to be careful, but also how to trust her instincts and recognize real love." "We will," I promised. "Together." As I hung up, I thought about the granddaughter who would carry my name. She would grow up in a world full of both predators and protectors. But unlike her grandmother, she would have the benefit of our hard-won wisdom, our vigilance, and our love, not as a weakness to be exploited, but as the strength it truly was. Because in the end, that was Jason Webb's greatest miscalculation. He saw love as a vulnerability to be manipulated. He never understood that it was also the force that would ultimately defeat him. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for 2 other stories that are channel favorites.